anyone who wants access to it can watch it at some point in the future. I'll post the, it'll go up on YouTube, so you won't have to do anything special to access it, but you'll be able to find it there. And I'll have it posted by early next week. And then I'll also post the presentation file that I'm going to be showing, obviously without the audio, to my blog. I'll do that next week as well. The address for my blog is at the bottom here, the prototopics.blogspot.com. So you'll be able to access just the kind of the main file as a PDF there. I want to get a few shout outs and thank yous at the beginning here. Sorry, that was my dog. The first person I want to thank is someone most of you probably have never even heard of, but Barb Hall worked for the University of Delaware system, which is, I'm not sure of the exact relationship, but they're the caretaker of all of the materials at the Hagley Museum and Library in Delaware. And they have the massive collection of Pennsylvania Railroad photos, including the freight car photos. And she, just diligently helped me over the years when I was purchasing large quantities of the photos. I think she has since retired and moved on to the private sector, but she was invaluable help. Several other people here who've helped me with photos and research and such. And I put Al and Eldon in there because of the book that they wrote, which is good because one of the reasons I was collecting all of these photos was to actually do the same thing they did, but they saved me the effort of having to do that, and I still have access to a lot of photos, so it all worked out in the end. So a little bit of a context about what I'm going to do here. This is a half-hour talk. The Pennsy-Gon fleet is enormous, and you could probably spend half a day talking about it and not cover everything. This is just a snapshot at the early 50s. So a lot of the photos I'm going to cover are not as built for the earlier cars and things like that. I'm really narrowing it down to the transition era. There's certainly a lot of resources out there if you want to go back and find things for earlier eras or some cars that are not even covered in this, and later ones as well. And I have some references at the end of this presentation if you'd like to do a little more detail. It's really intended for non-Pennsy modelers. If you're a Pennsy modeler, you can certainly build all the cars, but I think for a lot of us, you really, I hate to use the word need with anything because it's just talking about models, but you should have one or two Pennsy-Gons because their fleet was so enormous and their cars showed up everywhere that it's just, makes sense. The background photo that you see here, there's a ton of Pennsy-Gons tucked in there. You see the first three Gons. The left-hand one in the front is a G27, and then the two to the right of it are G28s. There's more of them tucked in there. This photo happened to be in Boston on the New Haven, but any yard shot pretty much anywhere in the country with enough cars had Pennsy-Gons in it. So this data that I'm showing you here is from the October 51 official railway equipment register. And this is the summary data at the kind of the end of the listing for Pennsy cars. You would find this for any railroad. It would have a summation of their equipment by mechanical designation and then capacity, dimensions, that kind of thing. I presented it in exactly the fashion it was presented there, but a couple of things to highlight. Going down, the third row is the GS class. Those were built right at the beginning of the 20th century. There are still 2,200 of them in GS plus another 478 GSHs. And there were also another small group of GSs listed at the bottom here that were in special service. There are 4,500 GRAs in 1951. So it's a very significant car by numbers at that time. There are still 2,400 G25s. The G25, what we'll cover, was a USRA Gon. Penske wasn't even particularly fond of it, but because it was the Penske, they had a lot of them. There are still 5,600 G22s. So, even if you're modeling the 50s, there are some cars that are quite old that might make sense for you to have. So what I'm going to do now is kind of go through all of the classes with a couple exceptions that don't make sense to cover. I lumped the GR and the GRA together because they're very similar cars. They were both built around the same time, basically, or early 20th century. The GRs were 37.5 feet inside length. The GRAs were 40.5 feet. Both roughly 15,000 of each of them built. They look a lot like flat cars with composite sides, essentially, and that was fairly common for flat car or for Gons that were sort of general Gons built around that same time. Many of you may be familiar with Reading and Central New Jersey's. That's something that continued even into the 20s, though, with like the nickel plate had longer Gons with that same basic design configuration. And these cars had originally wood drop ends, and then they were steel sheathed wood. So I'll show you a few photos here. So again, I'm presenting them in the context of how they looked, in the late 40s and into the early 50s. So the top photo here this is a GR. This car was repainted in the summer of 44. So this is how they would look then. You can see the boards that make up the sides, but basically this looks like a flat car with those pressed steel shapes holding the side boards there. And then you see the end here. It's a drop end. It's fairly simple. It's wood with steel kind of reinforcing it, just flat steel with a few straps. The uncoupling devices there are Karmer type, which are what these cars were built with. You notice those big push-pull pocket castings at the corners there. These were fairly simple cars, and they, were fairly easy to repair just because of the way they were put together. So they ended up being durable. Here's another photo of that same car. I love the kind of coiled wire load that would be tedious to make, but would be really interesting from a modeling perspective. Here's one of the GRAs, and the distinctive feature, just going back, if you look at the center of this car where the capacity information is, capacity, load limit, lightweight, those pressed steel shapes are spaced evenly, just like the rest of the car. To distinguish that from a GRA, you notice on the GRA here where that capacity information is, those center shapes are a little bit more widely spaced. That's where they made up that most of that difference in the length of this car versus the GRA. Again, another interesting load here. Penske Gons, just because of where they served primarily, a lot of them were effectively like, pickup trucks that were just used to haul almost anything. You see the way, though, this is secured. There's a lot of strapping and banding around it to keep it kind of as well as it could be held in place. Here's a couple more photos of GRAs. The top one gives you a nice low look. Again, they're very simple to replace those boards when they get worn out. The one at the bottom here has a great lumber load. It's difficult to tell how much it's shifted, because it does appear that it's shifted a little, but those boards at the end that are kind of diagonally in place, it's hard to tell, since it's still coupled to the car next to it, whether those had been purposely loaded that way or if it's completely shifted and they've fallen down. And here's a photo of a GR. Gives you a good view of kind of the top. You can see the angles at the top of the sides that help to prevent the edges of the boards at the top from getting beaten up. The interesting thing about the load in this car, it's actually cut up steel from freight cars. And if I remember seeing a notation somewhere, they were probably X25s that were being scrapped around this time. So neat detail there. And this is a model I built years ago of a Westerfield GRA Gon. It still has the stake pockets on the sideboards you can see there. I didn't do a particularly good job at preventing the overspray of the silver on certain places of this, but the way I made this load, all of the twistings that come from drilling holes and such over the years, I just kept throwing them into a plastic bag and threw in other bits and scraps and things. And it ends up looking like stuff you might find that's scrapped from a very large machining operation that could be recycled at some point. Moving on to the GS Gons, these were built around the same time as the GR and GRAs. These were all steel, so they were pretty modern for the time. They had fishbelly center sills, fairly modest 38-foot inside length. They did have stake pockets inside the cars when they were built. And as you see with, over 32,000 built, it was a massive group of cars. As built, a lot of them had drop doors, so they could be used not only for kind of typical Gon moves, but they could also be used for loose commodities, things like coal and such. In 1944, as a side note, they rebuilt almost 1,000 of them by strengthening the upper cord on the sides and reinforcing the side sill, and those were classed as GSH. So here's one of the GS Gons as it looked in the very late 40s. You see those small pipe sections that are inside. Again, another interesting load variation. These were also built with Karmer uncoupling devices, as you see there. This one had been upgraded to AB brakes at the time this photo was taken. Here's another shot of a GS that's also been upgraded to AB brakes. It's a good photo because you see the long kind of angled grabs on the end there, as well as the one that went across the center of the top of the end. Good view of the Karmer uncoupling device as well. And here's a shot looking straight down on the end. Again, good view of a lot of the details. The brake step, which was fairly long, and you see how the staff passes through the end sill there, and you've got a couple pressed steel reinforcing sections on the end as well. You can see a little bit of a telltale of some of where the stake pockets were on the left interior, about midway on the interior of the side there. The stake pockets were removed on a lot of these cars just because the usage of them changed over the years, and they weren't really using that type of hauling commodities that required that. I also like this photo because that New York Central flat car to the left, it gives you a very good view of the stake pockets on those cars, which were unusual. And then this just shows you the GSH class as they were kind of rebuilt. The top cord along the side was reinforced, but you can also see that long support section below the side sill that ran past the bolsters and reinforced almost the entire side sill. Here's photos of a couple models that I built of these. The top one there is a Sunshine car, and it's got the small coffee stir drinking straws that I use as a pipe load. And then the bottom one there is a GSH. That is a Yankee Clipper model that is also available now from Finaro. And that load was the Sunshine Models crushed baled metal load that they offered. Moving on to the G22. So this kind of is a more modern car, and it's you know what we think of as kind of the teens through the 20s classic mill gon with straight sides and fishbelly center sills. It did have fixed ends, which you know, a lot of mill gons had drop ends. A small number of these were built with drop ends. The 46-foot inside length was definitely an increase for the era. These were built in the teens, just before World War I, along with a gon that was built by the Wheeling and Lake Erie. These and that Wheeling and Lake Erie gon really provided a lot of the influence for the USRA 70-ton mill gon of the World War I era. And these came with 4 drop doors, but most of those were rebuilt to solid floors in the late 20s through the 30s. So from my perspective, as someone who's doing the early 50s, I would have a flat, tight floor. And some of these were used in container service, which, you know, a lot of us have seen photos of because that was certainly an interesting look. So this is one of the cars as it existed in the mid 50s. You see the trucks, they had these large Crown Andrews trucks. And I haven't put the Pennsy truck classifications because I think to most people except Pennsy modelers, they just add more confusion to things. If that's something you're interested in, that data is certainly available. But it's a distinctive truck. It's available from Bowser. It's the same truck that they use on their H21 Hopper series. You also notice this car has a little bit of a bow to it. It is almost 40 years old at this point, so it's certainly understandable. And here's another photo of one from a good angle from a modeling perspective. You can see the end sill, the single stiffener on the ends. Again, these had fixed ends. The way the side structural members were shaped, you notice how they are far more proud from the side of the car, the lower they get down near the side sill, and then they taper back in. That was something that was common not only to this class, but also to the GS gons that we looked at a little bit earlier. Pretty common on Pennsy gons. You can see the toe loops. There's one at the far left of the end below that left grab iron. It's that little kind of semicircle. Those at this time were castings that were riveted to the side sill. And then this load, if somebody wants to post in the chat section if they know what these are, I'm unaware. They're containers of some type, but I'm not quite certain what they were for. And then here's one of the cars that was used in container service. Again, these were photographed heavily, but they're really, you know, in terms of numbers, there were not a ton of them. This car, you will notice, also has that leaf spring in the center of the spring package. You can see on the side frames. Again, you can see the side structural members, how they angle out and down and then taper right back in below the where the floor line is there. Again, Karmer uncoupling devices on these cars as well. They were built in the teens. And then here's a model I built years ago of the Westerfield car. I believe the Westerfield cars are still available. Finaro has also released a very nice one-piece casting for these also, which I haven't built yet, but I plan to tackle that over the course of the next year. You'll notice if you're paying attention, I skipped the G23. That's actually primarily a, even though it's given a G classification, it's more of a like a coal gon, one of those big coal Gons that some roads had, and there was only one of them. So I kind of skipped right over it. The G24s were 50-ton composite USRA cars. You know, the Pennsy, just because of the virtue of its size and the areas of the country it served, they were given allocations for a lot of USRA cars. On most railroads, 2,000 Gons would be a lot. On the Pennsy, you know, they're not quite a footnote, but they're not significant. But you know, with 2,000, they add up. They were rebuilt beginning in 29 with steel sheathing. Apologize for the quality of this image. The negatives at the Hagley have been deteriorating over time, and this is one of them that's kind of wrinkling, but it gives you at least a good view of the important details. This car has been upgraded with AB brakes. It has plate steel in place of where the wood sheathing boards were. It's been upgraded with a quick go power handbrake. Still retains the Andrews trucks that were typical on most 50-ton and 40-ton USRA design cars. Here's a good shot of that end, again showing that power handbrake that was added. Karmer uncoupling devices on these as well. Here's one of those cars after it had been upgraded. Some of the cars had, you see there's 3 additional structural members, one in the end panel at each end, and then one in the very center of the car. That wasn't on all cars, and you know, it's something you could certainly add, fabricating with some strip styrene. You also notice the leaf spring in the spring package of these Andrews trucks, which is unusual. And here's one of those cars after it had been rebuilt that was hauling auto frames. There is a load for auto frames in HO scale. I think it's been bounced around by a couple manufacturers, but I'm pretty sure they're still available. And there was a lot of auto frame movement in Gons, not just these, but on a lot of roads, and it makes an attractive load, particularly if you get all of the kind of brackets that they had at each end to prop them up and keep them tight. The G25 was the other USRA car that Pennsy received. They received 2,500 of these. Again, I mentioned earlier that they look, at a cursory glance, they're very similar to the G22, just because the USRA design was influenced by the G22 as well as the Wheeling and Lake Erie Gon, built around the same time. The Pennsy received their 2,500 cars, and they didn't buy any more, unlike there were some other roads, notably the New York Central system, as well as the B&O, that adopted that USRA design as kind of their standard Milgon throughout the 20s. And they just made some changes in appliances and things as they purchased new ones. But the Pennsy did not. They got this group and then they didn't go back. So this is one of those cars. This is also in the late 40s. Again, straight sides with a fish belly center cylinder frame. This has those Crown Andrews trucks, drop ends, and you can see that little circular depression in the drop end there. The handbrake was a drop shaft handbrake, and if it was dropped lower, that depression would allow the wheel to kind of nest in that depression without fouling against the end of the car. I did have a photo of a model of one of those from Westerfield that I forgot to put in there. I will do that before I publish this presentation so you can see it. So that kind of gets you through the 20s. And then into the 30s, the Pennsy started building large quantities of their own Gons. They introduced what I've called this wide rib feature, and I'll show it in the photos here, but they would have kind of typically sized ribs on a lot of the places on the sides, but there were locations where they had much wider ribs, presumably to provide some additional stiffness to the sides in certain locations to help, with the overall integrity of the cars. So I'll point that out. The other thing that's just was staggering to me is that the Pennsy built 2,400 of these Gons. I haven't added up the numbers, but in the mid to late 30s, I would be shocked if 2,400 wasn't close to the entire number of 60 to 65 foot Gons on all other railroads combined. Because if you look at some of the other railroads that had large quantities, like the New York Central System and the B&O, they were 100 here, 200 there, and then it just drops off precipitously after that. Most railroads didn't start buying Gons this long until the early 40s, and then through the 40s and into the 50s. So this was just a huge investment by the Pennsy. The other thing about these is it marked a shift to straight center sills with deep side sills that look like a fish belly. So it's a change in design that comes about with the AAR center sills that were introduced in the early 30s as well. So this gives you a view of what one of these cars looks like. If you look at the sections that are over the trucks, as well as the two that are at the bottom of the angle of the sides, those are much wider and beefier than the rest of those side structural members. That's what I meant by the wide rib. And you'll see that across most of the Pennsy proprietary Gon designs of the 30s and 40s and into the 50s. You also have a very strongly reinforced sill that runs along the bottom of the side as well. This is one with a great load. This would be neat to model. Fairly narrow pipe, and it has all of the bracing and such that's required by the AAR for loading. That truck, I'd have to check, but it looks like a Dahlman 1 level, which is an unusual design, particularly as a 70-ton truck. And then here is the GSA. And the difference, I'll go back quickly. If you look at the center structural post on this car, it doesn't run all the way down to the bottom of the side. Whereas the center post here, not only does it run all the way down to the side, but it's one of those beefier structural members as well. That's kind of one of the big spotting features. Some cars in the G26 class were actually retrofitted with a long members, so you have to kind of pay attention to that class designation that's stenciled on a car side as well as the car number. But that's one of the big spotting differences between these two classes. Again, massive number of these. This would be a great car to have models of. There is a kind of HO scale car that I'll talk about at the end of the presentation. Moving on to the G27. So this really helped usher in the 52.5 foot inside length, which was by no means the standard at the time these cars were built. Pennsy constructed 4,500 of them in their shops, and they share a lot of similarities to the G26. You can easily tell that they are members of the same family of cars. You look, they have those same beefy members above the body bolsters, as well as at the bottom of the peak of the angle where the sides bottom out. They have that strongly reinforced bottom edge of the side as well. This particular group, as you can see, had the leaf springs in the center of the truck spring package there. And they used two different types of ends. This one was called a tray end. As you can see, it's flat and it has a little impression in it, like a cafeteria tray. You notice the safety tread brake step there, and then the handbrakes. The one you see here is a Classing power lever handbrake there. One interesting thing that I do not have a good answer on, if you notice the way the end sills are on this car versus this other one with a different end style, This one here does not have a flange along the bottom of it. It's possible that it's facing inward as opposed to outward, which would be a slight difference that could be attributable to when they ordered them. They made that change with the way that these were manufactured. There's also that little kind of rectangular opening with round corners below the right-hand grab iron. I don't know what that is, but that's also not present on the cars with dreadnought ends, as you can see here. So there's just a couple details to be aware of. Here's a 3/4 view of one of these cars. Again, you get a good view of that leaf spring and the truck package there. And here's an in-service photo. This one has National Type B 70-ton trucks. And Sunshine produced models of most of the variations of these. This is one of the ones with the dreadnought drop ends. I built this years and years ago. The G28 is a relatively small group of cars by Pennsy standards. They're only 1,900. They built them in their own shops right before the war. They converted one of these cars to composite as a test of an emergency design that could have been built under War Production Board control. A small group of these cars were assigned to auto frame loading as well. Here's a good 3/4 view. You notice that really large section that's at the bottom of the drop end there. These had the National Type B. I'm presuming these were National Type B1 trucks given when this car was built. And here's another view of one. This is right after it was built. This is November of 1940. Here's a good shot of the end of one of these in service. Again, you can see what I was talking about with that, that section that's above the end sill and at the bottom of the end there with those 5 triangular webs in it. This is a car that Finero has released. I made patterns years ago and never got it off the ground. And this is right as it was before it was going to go into production. So I essentially have one model for myself. I may do something about releasing these, but it was something I was very happy with the way it came out. I just, when things kind of went crazy with my divorce and such, I put this to the side and didn't pick it up again in time, and Finero released a model. The G29 is only a 46-foot car, but it incorporates a lot of the same features I've been talking about that made it uniquely Pennsy. My guess is the reason for the length that's a little bit shorter than what had become the standard is these were probably used for raw materials that were heavy, dense, and didn't require that additional length. Here's a photo of one of those cars. This is, again, 70-ton car. It has those same 4 beefy side members that has become a trademark of Pennsy Gons. Dreadnought ends. This has National B trucks as well. Here's a view of one of them in service hauling scraps, some of it baled metal. This one also has the National B trucks. They also built composite versions of these during the war. There were 550-ton cars like this one shown here and 570-ton cars. The interesting thing I love about this photo is, they were building things with whatever they had available. You notice that end shot there that you can see. There's 2 panels in that end, and they each have 1 dreadnought corrugation. On this very same car at the other end, it had a dreadnought end with 3 corrugations in 1 panel. I mean, steel was being so closely monitored that, you end up with situations like this where it's basically whatever you can get. Also, because it was an emergency design, below the end here, you can see 3 wood stringers visible to the right of the angle cock air hose and kind of behind the grab iron there. Most of the emergency design cars had 6 heavy wood stringers in place of steel stringers where they could. Oh, one other thing. If you notice that those small dreadnought darts at the edges, at the top of the end here have actually been, it looks like, pounded out somehow or pressed out. Just again, using whatever they have. Here's what some of those composite cars looked like after these sides were replaced with steel sheathing. They started doing that in the late 40s and continued it into well into the 50s. Here's a couple of models. The top one there is a Sunshine Gon with some of their ingots that they had as a load. That car is obviously out of production given that Sunshine is no longer in business, but Finaro offers a G29 as well. The bottom one is one of the Sunshine composite Gons that I built for a G29. That is unfortunately no longer available, and Finaro has not released anything like that. The G30s were the 1,000 emergency Gons that the Pennsy built in their own shops. Those were built to the AAR approved design for these. They were built in 43. They're very similar to most of the other emergency Gons associated with this design. Each road had their own little, detail tweaks that made theirs, unique to them. But the basics are the same on all of them. Again, in the late 40s, they started replacing the wood with steel. This car has a Klasing ratchet power handbrake. You can see the dreadnought drop ends that were applied to these cars. Here's one in service fairly soon after being built with Phelps Dodge reels for the load. And here's one of the cars with the steel replacement sides, as you can see here. I built this eons ago. This is an old Sunshine kit with, they offered, a master's edition with the interior boards, and the trucks there are the old Red Ball Cape Line metal National Type Bs. I don't even remember if they were Type B or Type B1, but at the time they were pretty much all that was available. There are obviously better models of these available now. The G31 is one of the most numerous classes. And because I'm kind of cutting things off in late 51, I put the C, D, and E's parenthetically. But the G31 and then the A's and B's were all built mostly by the end of 51. So they kind of fit what I'm covering here. There are a lot of differences, and I felt like the book I reference in the list of references at the end of this presentation, that there are some inconsistencies in the information presented there that led me to not be able to take a firm stand, particularly since I haven't studied the G31s as much as other cars. However, there were a group that were of 2,900 that were built by the company. There were another almost 4,800 that were leased from Pullman and built by Pullman. Some of them had car builders drop ends. The book intimates that they all did, but if you look at some photos of some of these cars, they don't have Pullman car builders ends. So I think some of that requires a little more fleshing out. And then there were 2,000 cars built by American Car and Foundry. The location of the tie downs, which are those like little U-shaped clips, varied across some of these groups as well. Here's one of the AC&F cars, and you notice those clips are mounted along the top of the side cord there. This group had ASF 70-ton A3 trucks. One interesting detail that I like is that the defect card holder, if you see the PEN and the reporting marks and the capacity data, that little thing with like a flap that's mounted to the side, that was one of the kind of coolest defect card holders out there. It's an interesting detail to make. Again, these cars still had that same trademark, with some of the side stake structural members being beefier than the others. These cars were welded, as you can see. There's an absence of rivets there. I'm showing you a couple photos that Jim Parker took of cars with those Pullman car builders ends. Here's a view, and here's a closer view. This is the same end that Pullman used, presumably, on most of their PS5 Gons that they built as well. You get a really good look at that defect card holder I was talking about also. And the sill steps on these they were kind of a little bent in a weird shape. And here's one of the cars a little bit later on. It's been painted in the Shadow Keystone. It is.
Lui est plate. Cul de toad.
Sorry, I'm gonna mute there if I can get my cursor to work here. I don't know, Hunter, maybe you can handle that. Mute that gentleman, please. This had the Dreadnought drop ends. Here's a couple photos of the Tangent models. Tangent has produced extremely nice models of these cars. With different flavorings, these were ran on a lot of other railroads as well. So you can get accurate models for many different railroads. And Tangent also did the Bethlehem Gons as well. So there's a lot of nice 52.5 foot late 40s, early 50 Gons that they make. The G32 600 cars built by the Pennsy. These were welded. They look very similar to the G29 in all other respects. They did have tie downs. Here's a photo of a G32A. Those cars could probably be modeled just by taking a G29 and getting rid of the rivets. The G33 was the second group of 65-foot Gons that the Pennsy built. Again, these share a lot of the same trademarks of this whole family of Gons with the structural members. These were welded, 3 groups built, 49, 51, and 53. Here's a photo of the end, really kind of stout looking end. And again, these were all welded also. No models that I'm aware of these at present. And then the last car we're going to cover, the G34. These were 2,000 cars that Bethlehem built and leased to the Pennsy. What's interesting about these are 46 feet. They look like no other Pennsy Gons. I haven't compared drawings and dimensions and such, but my guess is these are a modification of the 41.5 foot AAR Gon design, and could probably be kit bashed from an AccuRail Gon just by taking 2 and lengthening them. And you might have to alter the height by taking a little material off the top of the sides. And then here's a list of references, and I'll just quickly touch the first thing here is the book that was written that I referenced. The Keystone Modeler had a lot of articles about prototype and modeling in HO scale of Pennsy Gons. They covered almost every Pennsy Gon out there. You can get drawings from the Pennsy site, the Historical Society site. It's a 2-step process. You have to order the list of available drawings, and then you order based upon that list the drawings that you want. There's a couple other articles referenced here. Here's a list of HO scale models for you to refer to. And that is it. If there are any questions, I think I'm guessing I ran over. Yes, by quite a bit, sorry. Questions can be sent to me as well.
All right, Ted, Ryan here, great presentation. Excellent photos throughout the whole thing. There are a few questions. There's one about the ribs on the G26. Are they ribs a box section?
They are. It's like a primarily rectangular shape, square shape with obviously flanges where it's welded to the sides, and that the corners that are out that you could see are rounded a little bit. So it's you could take to make it like a square styrene strip and just take some sandpaper and round the corners a little bit to reproduce that.
Okay. On the G27, is there no polling pocket on the handbrake corner?
I believe it might be below the, let me see if we can go back to the, I'll go back to the photo quickly while you can give me another question while I pull that up and find it.
The defect card holder, are they only on one side of the car?
They are, yes, they're just on one side of the car because you wouldn't have two. Yeah, that polling kind of half circle isn't below the handbrake because it would interfere with the handbrake, correct? And the defect card holders, yes, only one side.
Okay. There was another question earlier, so I'm not sure which car they're referring to because it doesn't say in the question here. Were the internal stake pockets the fold-down type made of heavy rods, or were they standard flat car type? I think this is back like with the G22s or something.
It might have been the GS. I don't have, I can look to see if I have a drawing of that. I don't think they were making collapsible stake pockets at that point. I think they were like fixed, but I'll look. I may have a drawing for that.
Okay. Just look. I think that's it for questions. Any more questions, guys? If not, you went a couple minutes over, Ted. So
I'm going to eat up like 30 more seconds just to say, because I actually have to leave earlier than my two co-hosts. I have to go to a birthday party, but I want to say thank you again to everyone for coming, to the presenters. We really appreciate the support, and we're happy at how this is going. So I'll be signing off earlier than everyone else, but I appreciate everything that's going on here. We're really enjoying this. Thanks.
okay, great. We've got Ken